Hello and welcome to this instructional video. In the last few videos we've been looking at how to set up a facing operation and how to display the toolpaths, how to reorganize the operations in the tree. In this video we're going to spend a few minutes looking at things you might want to improve on your facing operation after you have generated it. So normally you don't know what you're going to get until you've actually generated the toolpaths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the facing operation. You should have one of these in your tree. And I'm going to just hit the replay toolpath button, and we can see here that we have our toolpaths that we created and generated previously. So one of the things that you may want to try to do is you may want to try to reduce the number of passes that the tool takes to machine this face. Right now if we count, we can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 passes. And there's of course one roughing pass, and there's also a finishing pass. If one zooms in, one can see the cyan or light blue color. So if we wanted to change the number of passes, how would we do that? Let's go ahead and hit OK. And we would go to our first tab here, which is our machining strategy. And what we can do is we can go to our radial tab. And the first thing we can try to do is we can try to change our step over. So if we look at the mode right now, we see that we're controlling step over really by the overlap of the tool, the amount of overlap between two adjacent passes. Right now it's set to 25. So we could possibly try to reduce this, to make the overlap smaller. We could take it down to, let's say, 10%. And let's replay the toolpaths and see what that does for us. So if we look at this, we see that we still have 6 passes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that really did not help us much in terms of making this operation more efficient. So let's hit OK. Is there anything else we can change here? Well, let's look at the overhang. Let's hit the question mark again to see what overhang does. So right now our overhang is set to 50%, which means that there's going to be a pass on the bottom of the part where the cutter center runs over the edge. Similarly, one over the top. If we want to, we could actually shift this towards 0. We don't want it to ever be 0 because that might mean that we don't fully machine the surface because the corner of the insert is not perfectly sharp. But we certainly could shift this away from 50%, and maybe instead of 50% we can do a 10% overlap. So we'll pull the cutter in from the top and push it up from the bottom. So let's see what we get if we go to 10% overhang and regenerate our toolpaths. And now if we count the number of passes we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So by making that change, we have gone from 6 passes to 4 passes, and we've done that at both roughing and a roughing pass and a finishing pass. Imagine if you had multiple roughing passes, if you had to do more facing, that would be a significant time saver. So we're talking about a reduction probably in 30% in the number of motions or the amount of distance that the cutter has to travel. So that's one of the things to pay attention to, is the number of passes, and those are ways in which you can play around with, experiment with looking at different options. And the other thing you may want to do is influence the direction of cut and where the cut starts. So there are two places you can go to do this. If we go back to the Geometry tab, notice that there is this little dot here, which if you read the information up here, when you move the mouse over it, it says click to select a start point. So right now the start point has been chosen by CATIA, and in this case, if we generate the toolpaths, the start point is obviously being generated off the top left-hand corner of the part. Let's say we wanted to shift the start point from here to over the bottom right-hand corner. So to do this, we would select on the select start point, and then you can just pick the corner of the stock. Notice that the start point is tagged. And now if we generate toolpaths, we see that the initial approach from tool change, this yellow line here, is going towards this corner. So we've shifted the toolpath starting point from the left side of the part over here to the right side. So that's one way you can influence the toolpath generation. And then the final thing is the toolpath direction. And you can do that in two ways. You can either do it here, or you can also do it here. So you can select the machining direction, or you can, so there are two places to do this. Let's do it here. And right now the machining direction is from right to left along the x-axis direction. Let's say we wanted to shift it so that we're cutting along the y-axis direction. Then what we can do is we can either type in a vector that represents the y-axis, which would be 0, 1, 0, or we could just select an edge on the stock to align the machining direction with the y-axis. As you can see here, it does the same thing. Said okay, let's generate our toolpaths. And now what we see is that instead of the toolpaths being generated along the x-axis, the primary motion is being generated along the y-axis. And again, notice that the start point still remains the bottom right-hand corner. So these are a couple of things that you can do. Again, trying to optimize your passes, trying to get them to be as few as possible is always a good thing. And then you may at times have reason to want to change where the start point of your operation is, as well as you may want to change the direction in which the cutter is moving. Of course, you also have the option, if you go back to the first tab, to change the toolpath style. So if you look at one way, for example, and generate your toolpaths, notice that what is happening here, if you rewind, and I'm going to go in and change this to, again, point by point, just so that we can see a little bit more clearly what's happening. If I step the tool through, we have our first approach, we have our motion across the part, we have a return motion. So in this case, the cutter returns on the part, which is not a good thing. And then the cutter continues kind of in a Z-type motion. Now this return motion, the reason why this return motion is not a retract, a rapid, and an approach, that is because if I hit OK here, if I go to the last tab here, there's some macros here that have to be set to allow the tool to lift. And we haven't covered those yet, but this is just to let you know that that's the case. So you need to pay attention to a lot of things. And again, switching it to one way greatly complicated the definition of the toolpath, because now you have to go in and set additional macros so that the tool knows how to reposition between each pass. So I'm going to just switch it back to back and forth, since that's what we set up. And again, in summary, this video helped you look at some ways in which you can change or troubleshoot your facing operation.